Hello, this is Shag, and I said recently that I'd be reading a plot summary of Chrono Cross. I think I said it was from Game FAQs, but I was wrong. It's from the Chrono compendium. That's the one I was thinking of. So, were you confused by the inane, nonsensical plot, quote-unquote, of Chrono Cross? Well, let's see if this helps. I have no idea if it will. But even if it doesn't, it will serve as a good way to encapsulate the insanity of that game. Let's put on some storytelling music. There we go. So, this page has two summaries of Chrono Cross. The first is written from an analytical perspective. It shows how the plot of Chrono Cross came to be, starting with the first catalyst event in Chrono Trigger. The second one is just a summary of it from Serge's perspective, aka what you learn in the game. So I'm skipping that one, but ahem, the analytical perspective summary of Chrono Cross. Origin of the Time Devourer. When Chrono was at the Ocean Palace and the red knife was plunged into the Mammon Machine, Scala was thrown into a dimensional vortex at the Ocean Palace disaster, along with the machine itself, where either lavos or temporal disruptions began emerging of the two beings at a place called the Darkness Beyond Time. This went unnoticed, and lavos merged with Scala with the intent of evolving into a being that could consume all space-time. In 2300 AD, before Chrono saved the world, Belthazar came in from the Ocean Palace disaster to find the new future. He set about building a research institute called Chronopolis in the Sea of Eden that is powered by a splinter of lavos which fell when he landed on the planet millions of years ago. That splinter was called the Frozen Flame. The flame allowed a kind of communication with lavos, and additionally, human contact with the Frozen Flame, in 3 million BC, was responsible for the evolution of humans who use magic. Belthazar constructed and ran a computer called Fate, and in the process found that Scala was being integrated with lavos. The resulting being, the Time Devourer, would have the capacity to destroy all space-time if allowed to complete the merge. Belthazar thus planned an elaborate, if not needlessly complex, plan to save Scala and eliminate the Time Devourer. Yeah, that's an understatement. Everything after this point is planned by Belthazar, who calls himself the Prophet of Time. Does it really count as, like, prophecy if you just... If I was just to say, like, the prophecy says I will have pancakes for breakfast, and then I have pancakes for breakfast, it doesn't make me a prophet. If you plan something and then do it, it's not a prophecy. Project Kid and Fate. Belthazar supposedly draws up plans for the counter-time experiment, which, if successful, would allow Chronopolis control over time itself. He then departs to the modern era, around 1010 to 1020 AD, and, in the future, the counter-time experiment failed, which caused the time crash. Lavos, awakened at the Ocean Palace according to plan, thought it might mess up history by sucking Chronopolis back through time, which had been exposed by the time crash. Excuse me, but why does Lavos have motivation suddenly? Lavos was like just a thing. I've been over this already. Let's see. Through the Frozen Flame it did so, pulling it back to 12,000 BC. The planet felt it needed to counterbalance the introduction of this temporal foreign facility by pulling in Dinopolis from an alternate dimension in which the reptites lived due to lavos never falling to the planet. Yeah, okay, I'll just go with that. The two institutions began warring. Chronopolis fought and won against Dinopolis, and used the power of the Frozen Flame to split up its deity power source, the Dragon God, into 6 separate entities. Maybe 7. Fate decided that in order to not mess up history, it should avoid contact with the mainland of Xenon, if possible. AKA, in order to make this somewhat believable, the writers decided to make an entirely new region and ignore Chrono Trigger's geography entirely. It terraformed El Nido so that it could set up its own paradise and dispatch the workers of Chronopolis to the new islands, erasing their memories in the process. The people would be guided by several terminals called the Records of Fate, aka save points, that could neurologically control its users. The Dragonians, who were survivors from Dinopolis, also settled El Nido, and they forged elements, or devices which could have a natural effect when activated. Lastly, it spread the remnants of the Dragon God around a few special islands named for their resident piece, Water Dragon Isle, etc. Settlement of El Nido. History proceeded here normally, and the survivors of Dinopolis, referred to as the Dragonians throughout the game, joined the humans of El Nido. Dragonian technology, called elements, was adopted by the residents of El Nido, and used as a form of magic. However, it should be noted that this is not innate, but mechanical magic. Element users are using manufactured devices to control the environment, while innate magic users, such as Magus and Chrono, are able to directly produce the effect themselves. All people have an element innate color, representing the type of element, water, wind, earth, etc., that they are in most harmony with. The Dragonians also created an emblem known as the Dragon Tier. In 920 AD, settlers from Xenon, the continent on which Guardia and Por from Chrono Trigger are located, found El Nido and began colonization. The Dragonians slowly died out, perhaps leaving demi-humans behind as half-children between humans and Dragonians. They may also be mystic remnants. A place known as Viper Manor was built at this time, and the Acacia Dragoons were established, who are the self-declared defenders of El Nido. The Viper clan was responsible for its founding, and probably immigrated from the mainland Xenon with others. Serge and the Frozen Flame. In 1005 AD, the Kingdom of Guardia met a violent end in a war with Por, who in this timeline had become a military power. See the compendium's Rise of Por article for theories on its military origins. This appears to leave out that the person in charge of destroying Guardia at the head of Por was Dalton the Joke Boss from Chrono Trigger, which is explained in Chrono Trigger DS's bonus content, which is garbage, in more than one way. Anyway, Por began creating plans for domination of El Nido. In 1003 AD, Serge was born, and in 1004 AD, Kid was created by Scala as a clone of herself, and sent into the world according to Belthazar's plan. She was found by Luca and raised in her house, which was then a converted orphanage. In 1006 AD, at the age of 3, Serge was wounded by a panther demon while playing outside. He was taken out to sea by his father Wazuki, along with Rizuki's friend Miguel, in an attempt to save him. Scala heard his crying from across time, and feeling empathy, she causes a huge magnetic storm to blow them off course to Chronopolis, since the Frozen Flame alone could save Serge. The storm caused Chronopolis' defenses to fall, leaving the facility entirely open. You'd think a future facility would have some protection against a storm, but I mentioned that already too. So, yeah. Serge was treated by the Frozen Flame, but it corrupted his father. The defenses came back online. Serge and Wazuki escaped, but Miguel was detained. By contacting the Frozen Flame, Serge became the Arbiter, meaning that only he could access it thanks to the Prometheus circuit, which is built to limit access as part of Belthazar's plan. The circuit was actually Robo, who volunteered to be part of the project. This was a huge setback for Fate in Chronopolis, as the flame was its power source. Fate took advantage of Wazuki's corruption and began to shape him to Fate's will. Lastly, during the storm and while Chronopolis was down, the split dragon gods briefly came together to create a seventh piece, known to us as the character Harley. Chrono Cross begins. In 1010 AD, Fate succeeded in having Serge's father kill him. The act of doing so permanently warped his father Wazuki into a being known as Lynx. After this, Harley befriended Lynx in order to get closer to the Frozen Flame. Time continued normally, and in 1015 AD, Fate attempted to track down Luca so that she may deactivate the Prometheus circuit, which was preventing Chronopolis from accessing its source of power, the frozen flame. Luca's orphanage was burned, and a few children were presumably killed. By presumably, you can go ahead and assume that yes. And Gato. Kid escaped the fire, and Luca's whereabouts are unknown after this event, but it is assumed she was probably killed for refusing to deactivate the lock on the frozen flame. According to Belthazar's plan, in 1020 AD, Kid went back in time to 1010 AD to save Serge. She succeeded, and a new dimension was fissioned off from the main one. The main dimension is now called Another World, and the new one in which Serge lives is called Homeworld. Inherent properties of Homeworld cause the future to end in ruin brought about by Lavos. This is reflected in the formation of the Dead Sea, which is the Homeworld Sea of Eden. Chronopolis has temporal links with the future and reflects its state. See the article Salt for the Dead Sea. That's a name, okay. In 1020 AD, Another World, Kid called out to Serge across the dimensions to where he was in the Homeworld. Additionally, Serge is able to travel between the two dimensions since he's absent from either one or the other at any given time. And that doesn't explain why anyone who he recruits can do it too, but whatever. Seeking the knowledge of why the dimensions exist and how he plays into the scheme of things, he embarks on a quest, partly for the frozen flame. Body switching and betrayal. Serge meets Kid for the first time at Cape Hell. The Acacia Dragoons had been dispatched to bring him in because Lynx wanted to capture him and switch bodies in order to gain access to the frozen flame at Chronopolis. The Prometheus circuit only allowed the Arbiter to enter, and one had to pass a biological confirmation of being the Arbiter. They defended the Dragoons and went to Termina. Or they defeated the Dragoons, I should say. There they decided to enter Viper Manor to learn more and possibly find the flame. They did not succeed, and Kid was poisoned by Lynx, but she would eventually recover. The quest for the flame would then lead Serge to Fort Dragonia, where Lynx switched bodies with him by using the Dragon Tear, which shattered in the process. The party received a shard later on. This effectively allowed Lynx and Fate to access their frozen flame again, since the Prometheus lock allowed biological matches of the Arbiter access to the flame. Serge, believing Fate is the enemy, journeyed to the Dead Sea and is empowered by the Dragon Gods later. He uses the Dragon Tear of the Homeworld dimension to regain his body, and in the process, it also shatters. Serge would also receive a shard from this Dragon Tear as well. Serge eventually made it to Chronopolis and battled Fate. After the computer's defeat, it is revealed that the Dragon Gods were merely using him as a tool to regain the frozen flame. The Dragon Gods, no longer subjugated by Fate, linked together to form the original Dragon God and stole the flame from Chronopolis. Once this occurred, Dinopolis rose from the ocean floor, and from parts of Sky Dragon Isle, and formed Terra Tower. Serge then trekked there and defeated the Dragon God. It is then revealed that the Dragon God had long since been consumed by the Time Devourer. Scala's freedom. Belthazar explained that all the transpired events were enacted simply so that Serge would be empowered and able enough to fight the Time Devourer and free Scala. Serge took the shards of the Dragon Tears to a Dragonian shrine and they formed the Chrono Cross. It is an artifact capable of wondrous things, including the unification of the dimensions back into one strain and the freedom of Scala from the Time Devourer. Using a Time Egg, the same device by which Chrono was resurrected in Chrono Trigger, Serge ventured to the darkness beyond time, where the Time Devourer resided, and used the Chrono Cross to free Scala. The dimensions for Home and Another World were also unified. However, little is known of the resolution of Chrono Cross. Serge apparently forgot the adventure after the cutscene when Scala is freed. Additionally, Scala and Kid were said to have merged into one entity, and Scala is hinted to have been sent into another dimension entirely. It has been theorized that Scala went back to find Janice, and would return to Serge again, even though Serge may not remember her. This was not entirely known for sure to happen, but it would explain Serge getting married to Kid someday, who is said to have merged with Scala into a single entity. This would also end Janice's search for his sister Scala, since she would go back to find him. It is also unknown precisely how the dimensions came together, and whether they adopted one dimension's history predominantly, or collated to form a sort of ideal dimension. Now that the Time Devourer has been eliminated, however, Belthazar's plan is complete, and the future can presumably continue on in prosperity. So, that's like the main part. I realized when reading this that it doesn't really explain anything, it just repeats everything that needs an explanation. Like, oh, well, they just used the thing, and they switched bodies, and they called out from across the dimension. It doesn't make any more sense, even when it's all in one giant block of text. But, maybe it helped someone. Let's read this last bit. The lost storyline? The story above may not be the plot as originally intended for Chrono Cross. Signs point to another overarching storyline that involves Serge binding with the Time Devourer itself. In this scenario, if Serge did not defeat the Time Devourer with a Chrono Cross, it would ultimately bind with it and cause the Time Devourer to mature, granting him the power to consume space-time. The Chrono Cross Ultimania supports this notion, claiming that the Arbiter of the Frozen Flame must mediate between his fellow lifeforms and Lavos, or else he will inevitably bind with the creature and spell destruction for other humans. The Ultimania also postulates that Scala was an Arbiter of the Frozen Flame while it existed in Zeal, and that is how she came to bind with Lavos. Apparently, the Time Devourer needed enough power before it could reach maturity, and Serge would have been the final piece in the puzzle. Quotes in the game also seem to hint at this possibility. 3 come to mind specifically. There's a demi-human in Marbule that states anyone who touches the flame will become a different being. Lynx at Viper Manor warns Serge that there shall be a deep enmity between you and the world once destruction occurs. Lastly, Belthazar notes that the Arbiter will gain extraordinary powers by binding with the new seed of destruction, the Devourer of Time. However, this storyline is not directly stated or implied by Chrono Cross, and neither has series creator Masato Kato confirmed it himself. For the time being, it remains speculation made by the Ultimania authors, considering that in the same book they contradict other canon, such as stating that the Prometheus circuit is not Robo, when Masato Kato noted that the circuit is Robo. The veracity of the Ultimania is arguable. So that was a fun article with a bunch of words that may have meant something, and were not necessarily the best, like, phrased. Oh, but we have other fun things on this wiki, like this dimension chart and this timeline chart that doesn't mean anything. There's like a chronology, which has all this separate jargon. You can download a text file of it. There's a lot of stuff. Basically, there's some articles in here somewhere that are like theory on how time travel and such in the game works in a way that seems like a college thesis or something, which is a little bit too much work to put into something about Chrono Cross, I would say. It's a little bit ridiculous. However, I do remember one part in that article being labeled Time Bastard, so that's funny. Anyway, oh look, a new tab. Why did I do that? Let's do it again. Hooray. Yeah, that's it. I guess we're done. I hope you learned... You probably didn't learn anything.